What are you doing around here, bro?
You're not allowed around here.
You're not allowed around here, bro. You little dirty nonce. Fuck off, you got him.
Get out the area, lad.
Akinwale was born on the 15th of July 1961 in the north of Manchester. He was of Nigerian descent on his mother's side, and his father's identity remains unknown. Placed in care as an infant, Akinwale spent time in a children's home in Llandudno, Wales. As an adult, he worked odd jobs: a tunnel cleaner, a council messenger, living a relatively unremarkable life at first. However, it was under the nickname Purple Aki that he became known for. Over the years, that name would be whispered in playgrounds and gyms as tales of a bizarre and frightening character spread. By the 1980s, Aki had developed a strange compulsion that set him apart. He was obsessed with muscles. Young men and teenagers in Merseyside and Greater Manchester began reporting encounters with a towering 6'5" bodybuilder who would approach them uninvited.
What's your best muscle? Happy.
In these encounters, Aki would strike up conversations about weight training and physique, then ask an unsettling favor: to feel their muscles. Sometimes he would even produce a tape measure to measure their biceps or thighs, or urge them to perform squat exercises on the spot. Those who met him described Aki's behavior as persistent and intimidating. He might follow his targets for days, show up outside their schools or gyms, and refuse to take no for an answer. As word spread, Purple Aki took on an almost mythic status. Teenagers swapped ever more elaborate stories of the muscle feeler. The tales varied, but certain details were consistent: that he was extraordinarily large and strong, and that he loved to grope young men's muscles. Parents would warn their children half-jokingly not to stay out after dark, or "Purple Aki will get you," as if invoking a bogeyman. Some rumors were so grotesque they bordered on folklore. Other whispers claimed his father was a high court judge, or that Aki had connections to underworld gangs. Such speculation only fed the growing mystery around the man. With the advent of the internet, Aki's infamy went viral. The line between fact and fiction blurred as local newspaper reports of his real arrests were shared online alongside exaggerated hearsay. On message boards and social media, people traded first-hand anecdotes of encountering Purple Aki at weight rooms or sports fields. One common scenario emerged. Aki would persuade a young man to do an inverted piggyback squat. The lifter, crouching with Aki draped over his back, face down, squeezing the person's quadriceps and calf muscles. Many who experienced these unwanted strength tests were left shaken and creeped out. His bizarre fixation inspired crude jokes, songs, and even graffiti. At the 2008 Glastonbury Music Festival, people waved a banner that was emblazoned with Aki's mugshot. Another festival flag in 2013 dubbed him the Gym Pest from the Northwest. Yet amid the humorous memes and tall tales, the true story of Akinwale was far darker than many realized. Beneath the urban legend lay a long history of harassment, fear, and legal battles. To understand where the myth ends and the man begins, we must look back to a real incident in the 1980s. In 1986, a 16-year-old from Liverpool named Gary Kelly found himself being followed by a man he didn't yet fully understand. This man, tall and heavily built, would appear outside Gary's school and around his neighborhood, pestering him with odd requests, asking to feel his muscles or watch him flex. At first, it may have seemed like a strange one-off, but over time, Gary began to feel uncomfortable. The same man kept showing up, watching, waiting. As the months went on, Gary's fear of him had become very real. On the 15th of June 1986, Gary and some friends were spending the afternoon at the outdoor swimming pool in New Brighton, a seaside town on the Wirral Peninsula. The boys were hoping to cool off and have fun, but Aki had followed them once again. Spotting the familiar silhouette watching them from a distance, Gary's response was immediate. He panicked and ran. He bolted out of the pool complex and sprinted toward the nearby railway station, desperately trying to get away. New Brighton Station is a terminus at the end of the line, and when Gary arrived, no train was departing. He hid inside an idle train carriage, hoping to evade his pursuer. Peering out from the train, Gary's worst nightmare materialized. Aki had followed him to the station and was now on the platform, looking for him. Terrified, Gary made a desperate attempt to escape. He leapt down from the platform onto the train tracks below. Gary Kelly stumbled onto the electrified third rail. A jolt of 750 volts shot through his body. Though help arrived and Gary was rushed to a hospital, the shock proved fatal. He was pronounced dead soon after, on arrival at the hospital. A bright young man, a soon-to-be father as it later emerged, had lost his life in a horrifying accident. And according to witnesses, it happened because he was fleeing from Aki. Purple Aki's local legend took on a much more sinister edge. This was no longer a harmless eccentric who pestered weightlifters. A teenager was dead, and Aki's involvement could not be ignored. Although Aki had not physically attacked or directly touched the boy that day, the law could view his actions as contributing to the fatal outcome. In 1986, Aki was charged with manslaughter. The case went to trial, and many in the public followed it closely, transfixed by the notion that the local bogeyman might finally be gone. In 1987, Arobieke was convicted of manslaughter. The court found that his menacing presence had directly led to Gary's deadly accident. The judge reasoned that Aki's behavior, lurking on the platform in pursuit of the boy, was sufficient to be considered unlawful harm, even without physical contact. Akinwale, then in his mid-20s, was sentenced to 30 months. However, Aki's lawyers immediately appealed the conviction. They argued that simply standing on a train platform and looking at someone, even in a threatening manner, was not a crime. There was no evidence Aki had physically harmed or explicitly threatened Gary, they pointed out. In 1988, a panel of 3 appellate judges agreed. They concluded that while the incident was tragic, Aki had technically not committed an indictable offense by being present and staring, an unsettling act, but not illegal in itself. The manslaughter conviction was overturned on appeal, and Aki's name was cleared of responsibility for Gary's death. After roughly a year in custody, he was released. Following the exoneration, Aki filed a complaint alleging that the prosecution against him had been driven by racial prejudice. In 1989, Aki succeeded in this claim. It was reported that he was awarded approximately £35,000 in compensation for the alleged racial overtones of the failed prosecution. Officially, the record now showed that Gary Kelly's death, while linked to Aki, involved no proven criminal act by him. By the mid-1990s, Aki's activities had reached such a scale that even professional athletes were on alert. In 1997, the tabloid press reported that several rugby league clubs in the Northwest had warned their players about a giant stalker targeting them. Arobieke would sneak into stadiums or approach players after matches, armed with uncanny personal information. Warrington Wolves club chairman John Smith went public, calling Aki a menace and voicing concern that unless something is done soon, somebody is going to get hurt. Players found their home addresses and phone numbers somehow compromised. The campaign of harassment appeared calculated. He has an astonishing ability to get hold of players' addresses and they just don't feel safe, the Warrington chairman remarked. Aki was alleged to have obtained press passes or rented flashy cars to gain proximity to his chosen victims. The police were well aware of Aki's reputation. but stopping him proved challenging. Victims often felt too embarrassed or afraid to come forward. After all, technically many of his actions straddled a grey area between unusual and criminal. Still, by the late 1990s, authorities began building a case. Dozens of young men eventually gave statements describing how Aki's unwanted attention made them fear for their safety. In November 2001, Aki was finally brought to court to face a litany of charges accumulated over years. Prosecutors charged him with no fewer than 50 counts of indecent assault and harassment against 14 teenage boys, spanning from 1995 to 2000. The sheer number of allegations truly underscored how prolific his harassment had been. When the 2001 trial commenced, Arobieke pleaded not guilty across the board. Many of the indecent assault charges were difficult to prove. They hinged on whether Aki's muscle touching was deemed indecent. In case after case, Aki's defense argued that he never intended assault, portraying him instead as an overzealous bodybuilding enthusiast who didn't understand personal boundaries. Ultimately, the jury did not convict him on the bulk of the charges. Aki was cleared of the 50 counts of indecent assault and harassment at that time. However, during the proceedings, a separate incident came to light that did result in a conviction. As a teenager, Kelly Mullaney first knew of Purple Aki as a local myth, something older kids whispered about near the park. People claimed he lived in the woods near her estate, but she didn't believe it. That changed when she encountered him in person. One day, while out with friends, Aki turned up in a silver Ford Granada. Everyone froze. He was massive, unmistakable. The myth had suddenly become real. Kelly recalled another day when she saw Aki trying to touch her brother's arms outside a local shop. She stepped in, warning him to leave her brother alone, or she'd call the police. About half an hour later, Aki turned up at her house. He banged on the door, shouted for her to come down, and when she refused, he shoved what looked like a gun through her letterbox and screamed, "You're dead! You're dead!" Terrified, Kelly called the police. Within a few minutes, multiple cars arrived. Aki was arrested and later charged with making threats to kill. Although no weapon was ever recovered, the threat was taken seriously, and he was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. Kelly later said she regretted getting involved, knowing it would upend her life. Fearing further harassment, she moved to a completely different part of the country. Even 16 years later, she said she still didn't feel safe. After serving his sentence for the threats, Aki was released in 2003. The authorities decided to launch a major crackdown. They reopened and expanded the earlier case, gathering fresh evidence of Aki's post-release harassment. The investigation was massive. Over 120 people were interviewed by Merseyside police in connection with Aki's intimidation spree. Facing overwhelming evidence, Arobieke chose not to contest the new charges. In December 2003, at Preston Crown Court, he pleaded guilty to 15 counts of harassment. Arobieke was sentenced to 6 years in prison. This 2003 sentence was the longest punishment Aki had faced yet, meant to keep him incarcerated until at least 2009. For a while, it seemed that the communities of northwest England might get a respite from the notorious muscle toucher. But even a 6-year term would not be the end of Purple Aki's saga. Aki was released on license on the 26th of October 2006, having served roughly half of his 6-year sentence. By this point, authorities understood that traditional incarceration alone might not stop his peculiar and dangerous behavior. Merseyside police applied to the court for a Sexual Offences Prevention Order, known as a SOPO, to restrict Arobieke's activities upon release. This move was noteworthy because Aki had never been convicted of a sexual offence. All his crimes fell under harassment or assault. Nevertheless, the police argued that his muscle-fixated harassment was indeed motivated and that an order was needed to protect the public from serious harm. A Liverpool magistrate granted an interim SOPO in late October 2006, effectively making Aki's notorious habits explicitly illegal. Aki was banned from touching, feeling, or measuring the muscles of anyone without consent. He was forbidden from asking people, especially strangers, to perform squats or any exercise in public. He also could not approach any young person under 18 and was prohibited from loitering near schools, gyms, or sports clubs. Furthermore, he was outright banished from entering certain towns known for strong rugby communities, St. Helens, Warrington, and Widnes, unless he obtained police permission first. To Aki, this muscle-touching ban was excessively harsh and, in his view, unwarranted. In February 2007, he appealed at Liverpool Crown Court. His argument was that his behaviour, strange as it was, did not constitute harm or justify such draconian measures. The appeal court took note that Arobieke technically had no crime convictions and that the prosecution had struggled to prove gratification in his earlier conduct. During the hearing, the judges remarked that the order seemed severe and that no evidence showed Aki's actions caused serious psychological harm beyond discomfort. The judge agreed with Aki. On the 23rd of February 2007, the court overturned the SOPO, lifting the ban on touching muscles. With that, Aki was technically free to pursue his interests within legal bounds. However, this victory for Aki was short-lived. Due to a legal technicality, a second overlapping order from a different jurisdiction was still in force. Moreover, Merseyside police immediately moved to appeal and reinstate the restrictions through another court. They were convinced that without the ban, Aki would quickly return to terrorizing young men, and they were correct. In the spring of 2007, as legal wrangling over the SOPO continued, Aki could not resist his old urges. On 25th May 2007, Aki approached a man at a shopping centre in Preston, Lancashire. He struck up a conversation about the man's physique, commented on the size of his biceps, and then, true to form, reached out and touched the man's arms without permission. This impulsive act landed Aki right back in trouble. He was arrested on suspicion of breaching the reinstated SOPO. In 2008, a court convicted him of the breach and sentenced him to 15 months in prison. Importantly, the judge made the muscle-touching ban permanent. During Aki's appeals and hearings, more disturbing details about his activities emerged. In July 2008, he once again petitioned to overturn the ban, appearing in court representing himself. The proceedings devolved into chaos. Aki behaved erratically in front of the judge, at one point abruptly stepping down from the dock to personally question the judge, and at another point walking out of the courtroom, clutching a plastic carrier bag, only to return minutes later and silently seat himself at the back. Court reporters described him as volatile and agitated. Eventually, Aki composed himself enough to address the court. In an unusual moment, he apologized to his victims, acknowledging the distress he had caused. During that same hearing, police provided evidence to underscore why Aki remained a serious threat. Detectives revealed that upon his arrest, Aki had been carrying a notebook, essentially a stalker's manual, filled with personal details of young men. The notebook contained names, phone numbers, and even information about some victims' families. It appeared Aki meticulously researched his targets, sometimes confronting them with surprisingly specific facts to sow fear. Investigators argued this demonstrated calculation and predation, not mere innocent fascination. The judge not only upheld the permanent ban, but also agreed that Aki's bizarre conduct was indeed driven. After the ruling, Aki remained in custody to serve out the remainder of the 15-month sentence for the Preston incident. In late 2008, shortly after being let out, Aki violated the order yet again. In one case, he approached a 17-year-old in Birkenhead and asked to feel the youth's biceps, a direct breach of the injunction against approaching youths and touching muscles. He was promptly arrested and convicted for this offense as well, resulting in an 18-month jail sentence in 2009. It was becoming a revolving door. Aki would be released under strict conditions, then offend again in short order, triggering a new prison term. In April 2010, Aki appeared before Mold Crown Court in North Wales, charged with multiple new counts of harassing young men in that region. A 16-year-old boy testified that Aki had approached him and, true to pattern, touched the teen's calf and thigh muscles against his will. This time, Aki insisted in court that he was the victim of malicious false reports. He claimed people were constantly calling police, saying they'd seen Purple Aki in various places, sometimes even when he was locked up. But the evidence in this case, including eyewitness accounts, was strong. In June 2010, a jury found him guilty of motivated assault, which was framed legally as another breach of the SOPO. The judge did not mince words in the verdict. He branded Aki a predator and imposed a sentence of 2.5 years in prison for the offense. Sitting in prison in 2010 after yet another conviction, Aki continued to protest that he was being persecuted. Purple Aki's notoriety meant false sightings were frequently reported by pranksters or panicked citizens. In June 2012, while Purple Aki was still behind bars, rumors spread on social media that he had died in custody. The chatter grew loud enough that Merseyside police publicly refuted it, assuring the public that Aki was alive and still serving time. In the summer of 2012, Aki was released after completing 2 years of his 30-month sentence. By then, he had spent more of the new millennium in prison than out. The legend of Purple Aki grew with every breach and every arrest reported in the news. The authorities were caught in a frustrating loop. They could keep jailing him for short stints, but none of it seemed to extinguish Aki's fixation. After his mid-2012 release, Aki found himself a marked man, both in the eyes of law enforcement and the court of public opinion. He was closely monitored by police in the Greater Manchester area. Perhaps inevitably, he was arrested yet again on suspicion of breaching the SOPO. This time, however, Aki decided to vigorously fight the allegations. He maintained that some of the new accusations were either exaggerated or outright fabricated by police who were out to get him. In August 2013, Aki was put on trial at Manchester Crown Court for allegedly harassing multiple young men in the city's St. Peter's Square, as well as in nearby Bolton and Trafford. These incidents were said to have occurred shortly after his 2012 release. Remarkably, the trial concluded with Aki being cleared of all charges. The not guilty verdict suggested that either the evidence was insufficient or that the jury believed Aki's claims that he'd been set up. Exiting the court as a free man, Aki told the court and the press that he felt he was the victim of a modern-day witch hunt. He pointed out that in at least one instance, police officers had proactively approached a potential complainant at home to solicit a statement rather than waiting for any victim to come forward on their own. In early 2014, Greater Manchester Police's Professional Standards Unit investigated Aki's claims of harassment by officers. They found evidence of misconduct in how certain police handled interactions with him. Notably, it emerged that a senior detective had taken a personal interest in Aki's presence at a bodybuilding event. Off duty at the time, the detective phoned an emergency operator and said, "There's a famous p***** here. His nickname is Purple Aki." In reality, Aki was not barred from attending, and crucially, he is not a pedophile. His victims, while young, have all been teens or adults, and he has no convictions involving children. The detective's inflammatory call led to Aki's immediate arrest at the event. The internal investigation found that the detective had acted unacceptably and unprofessionally in how he referred to and treated Aki. Furthermore, 2 senior officers received formal warnings for failing to properly handle an earlier complaint Aki filed against the detective. Based on these findings, Aki launched legal action against both Merseyside and Greater Manchester Police in 2014, seeking redress for what he viewed as years of unfair treatment. He highlighted that he had spent almost 2 years in custody on various charges that were eventually dropped or on which he was acquitted. These lawsuits would take time, and their results weren't widely publicized, but Aki's sense of persecution remained a consistent theme in his narrative. The muscle ban meant that any slip-up, any accusation of him touching someone, could send him back to prison. By late 2015, he was in trouble again. It stemmed from an incident 2 years prior. On the 11th of October 2013, a male university student riding an Arriva Trains Wales service from Manchester to Colwyn Bay reported that a large man fitting Aki's description sat next to him, asked invasive questions about his workout routine, and then asked to feel and measure his arm muscles. The student alleged that Aki did touch his arm without consent. This case finally went to trial in 2015 in Chester. Aki, representing himself in court, denied the charge and claimed it was a police setup leveraging his notoriety. Nevertheless, the jury found him guilty of breaching the SOPO in this train incident. During sentencing, Aki openly complained about the use of his nickname, Purple Aki, in the prosecution papers, asserting it was racist and prejudicial. In May 2016, with his decade-long string of SOPO breaches, Aki made a bid for freedom, not just from jail, but from the constraints that had defined his life. He applied to Manchester Crown Court to lift the offences prevention order once and for all. By this time, Aki was in his mid-50s and had spent significant portions of his life incarcerated. In his plea to the court, he acknowledged his long-standing interest in young men's physiques, but maintained, as he always had, that it was not in a sexual way. He argued that while he technically breached the order in the past, the behavior, talking about or even touching muscles, was not inherently criminal and had not caused serious harm. The judge considered the request and, somewhat surprisingly, sided with Aki. In May 2016, the court lifted the prevention order, freeing Aki from the special ban. Aki vowed to reinvent himself and stay out of trouble. "From today, I'm going to conduct myself properly. I'm not going to run around touching everybody's muscles because there's no need for that," he promised the court. By late 2016, Aki was, for the first time in many years, a free man without extraordinary legal shackles. But his infamy was far from forgotten. In fact, his story was about to gain national attention in a new way. On the 12th of September 2016, the BBC released an online documentary titled The Man Who Squeezes Muscles. This BBC Three film, by journalist Benjamin Zand, set out to explore the line between the myth and reality of Purple Aki. The documentary featured interviews with people who claimed to have encountered Aki, reflections on how his name became a folk warning to children, and some historical context. However, Aki himself did not participate on camera, and when he saw the documentary, he was outraged. The program repeatedly referred to him as a big black man and reinforced the urban legend aspects. Crucially, an accompanying BBC article explicitly noted the racial undertone of his nickname. To Aki, the documentary felt like a public shaming that dehumanized him and ignored the fact that he had never been convicted of a offense. He lodged a formal complaint, and in October 2016, he went to Merseyside Police, alleging that the BBC film amounted to incitement of racial hatred against him. The BBC stood by the documentary, stating it was a serious and considered film, examining how Aki had been portrayed by others, not an attack on him per se. In the years since, Arobieke has kept a somewhat lower profile, but the urban legend of Purple Aki endures. Social media sightings still pop up from time to time. In January 2019, for instance, a post on Facebook showed a grainy photo of a man resembling Aki, allegedly squeezing a young man's arm at a Manchester tram stop. It's unclear whether any official action was taken in that instance. It appears to have been more a viral moment than a substantiated crime. But such reports show how Aki's notoriety still generates buzz.